Hello dear students, in this video we are going to discuss about the electrical properties of the heart. In the previous video itself we have discussed several properties of the heart, but in this video we are going to specifically discuss about the cardiac potentials. Like the action potentials in the neurons and the nerve muscle physiology, here the cardiac muscles also has cardiac potentials or the cardiac action potentials. So we are going to discuss very specifically, and in the cardiac tissue, there are two types of action potential. One is the ventricular potential, another one is in the pacemaker potential. As we know that the ventricular potential will happen in the ventricular musculature. That is the ventricular musculature, ventricular muscles we can say. Whereas the pacemaker potential happens in the nodes, especially the SA node and the AV node. This action potential in the ventricular muscle is also called as fast type action potential. Fast type action potential. Why? Because here the fast sodium channels are going to get involved. Here this is also called as slow type action potential. Why? Because here the slow type or the slow acting calcium channels is going to come into action. So the calcium channels are going to come into action, which we'll discuss in detail. So this is the two differentiating potentials which we get in the cardiac tissue. So a brief basic about the electrical activity of the heart. The heart at rest, the musculature inside the cell, it is negative. This we all know. And whenever any impulse is given, suppose the impulse is given or the SA node is fired, what is going to happen? This negativity inside the cell, it is going to get converted. Since the cell at rest is having some charges, it is called as polarized state. It is called as polarized state. Now what is happening? We are given an impulse and this negativity is going to get converted into positive charges. So they are getting converted to positive charges. The negative charges are getting converted to positive charges. So this type of change in polarization, initially it was negative. Now what has happened? Now it has getting converted to a positive. So this change in polarization is called as depolarization. So how this can happen is, this can happen either there is an entry of positive charges or the positive ions which are entering, they give positive charges. So if there is an entry of positive charges, this type of depolarization happens. And after the depolarization or the entry of positive ions and everything has happened, the cell can go back to its baseline, that is called as repolarization. That is called as it is going back to its original state. Now it has changed the polarization, that is why it's called D. Now it is going back to its original state, it is called as repolarization. Why is this happening? This can happen, you might say this entry of negative charges and repolarization can happen, but most of the times it is the exit of positive charge. So repolarization, most of the times it is the exit of positive charge. Obviously entry of negative charge also can cause it, but most of the times it is exit of positive charge. That's why I'm mentioning here, because I have to know the ion channels which is entering and exiting. That is why we have to understand what is a depolarization. Depolarization means it is going towards positive. Repolarization means it is coming back towards its baseline, that is the RMP. As we have discussed, the fast type action potential and slow type action potential. Fast type action potential happens at the level of myocardium and Purkinje fibers. The myocardium generally has an RMP of minus 90 millivolts. So whenever we are making an x-axis and y-axis, in the y-axis we will start with minus 90 millivolt. This slow type action potential is happening in SA node and the AV node, and SA node has the RMP of minus 50 to minus 60 millivolt. So whenever we are making the graph of a slow type action potential, the RMP would be minus 50 or minus 60. So let's see the fast type action potential first. This fast type action potential happens at ventricular muscle, which we already saw. And along the x-axis, so always first try to construct the axis when you are constructing a graph. So along the x-axis, what do we have? We have the time in milliseconds. And along the y-axis, we have the voltage in millivolts. We will not label the graph completely because we just need few important areas of marking. That is the minus 90 here. Why minus 90? Because it's a ventricular muscle and minus 90 is the RMP for that ventricular muscle. And whenever it is going towards the positive, generally it reaches the positivity of plus 35. So that is what the markings we have indicated. And this type of action potential has multiple phases which are numbered over here. So first coming to the phase 0, this phase 0, what happens is it is moving towards the positive direction. So what is this? It is nothing but our depolarization. So which ion channel is entering here? The sodium ions are going to enter here. So 0 is nothing but our depolarization. And as you can see, the next phase, that is the phase 1, there is a slight fall, but this fall is not continuously falling. There is a slight fall. The slight fall is also a repolarization, but it is transient. So we have given the name for it. The scientists have given the name for it. That is a rapid transient repolarization. It's not a complete repolarization. That's why we are giving this name, rapid transient repolarization. Then after that, as you can see here, there is a straight line over here. That is our phase 2. I will tell you all the ion channels that is involved. First, we will label the phases. And phase 2, what is happening? There is a plateau. And after that, as you can see here, it is going down. So the phase 3 is nothing but our repolarization. And phase 4 is bringing back to RMP. Phase 4 is coming back to RMP. So these are the various different phases. And transient rapid repolarization, what is the ion channel? I told you most of the times in the repolarization, the positive ions will be moving out. Which ion is moving out? The potassium is moving out. And the sodium channels which are open already in the depolarization, they would have been closed by now. And next we have a plateau phase. To get a plateau phase, what is the logic? Equal amount of positivity should enter and equal amount of positivity should go out. So both the charges, if they are moving equally, it will create a plateau. So the potassium already it is going out, which we have seen. So the potassium going out is there, but some positivity has to enter it. What is that positivity? There we have the calcium. There we have the calcium. So calcium is entering and potassium is previously also exiting, but now these charges are matched. So it is creating a plateau. And after that, the phase 3, now the potassium will still keep on exiting and bring it back towards the RMP. And finally, the RMP will be maintained by sodium potassium ATPase pump. This in general physiology also you must have studied that the sodium potassium ATPase is the one which is trying to maintain the RMP always. So now let's recap and write the ionic basis. So here we have described the phases 0 to 4, the event which is happening which we already discussed, and the ionic basis. What are the ion channels involved? Just a recap of it. For the depolarization, what is happening? There is an entry of sodium ions. This channel is called as voltage gated sodium channels. Then after that, transient rapid repolation, what is happening? There is an exit of potassium. This is potassium exit. It is a rectifier type of channel. Rectifier means whatever event has happened that is going back to its original state. So it is called as a rectifier channel. In the plateau phase, I need some ions which is leaving. That is the potassium which was already leaving. So potassium exit is there. Plus there is an entry of calcium is there. So this potassium exit and the entry of calcium is causing the plateau phase. And since the calcium are entering, this is the phase where the contraction of the cardiac muscle begins. Generally, in case of a skeletal nerve, what will happen? Action potential will come and then it is followed by a contraction. But here, since the calcium ions are entering in this phase itself, the contraction begins here itself. And there is a significance for it. So that is important. So the contraction starts to begin. Then coming to the repolarization, again it is due to potassium exit. And finally the RMP is maintained by sodium potassium ATPase. So these are the ionic bases of various channels. Since the calcium has entered in and the contraction has begun, this calcium is generally the excess calcium. So what happens is from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the calcium will be released and usually the cardiac muscle, the calcium from the outside also will enter to stimulate this sarcoplasmic reticulum calcium to be released. Then after that, this calcium will be taken help by your actin myosin filaments, and there is going to be a contraction. And whenever there is an excess calcium, this calcium will be returned back to the sarcoplasmic reticulum with the help of a pump called as sarcoendoplasmic reticulum calcium channel. So calcium which is excess from the previous contraction, that will be returned back. And there is one more additional channel which is called as NCX. What is this NCX? That is sodium calcium exchange. Sodium calcium exchange. So this is going to establish. Why we are trying to understand this concept is because the digoxin is a drug which is increasing the cardiac contractility. So with the same amount of energy or the same amount of everything, it is going to help in the increasing the force of contraction or an inotropic effect. So this we can call it as an inotropic effect. How this digoxin is doing that? So ultimately, if I need to increase the force of contraction, I need excess calcium to be available. So whichever calcium has been released here, they are taken up by sarcoendoplasmic reticulum calcium channels and the sodium calcium exchange. So if I block these channels, obviously I will get extra availability of calcium for the next contraction. The digoxin does not do it directly, but it does it in an indirect manner. It attacks on the channel and blocks the channel of sodium potassium ATPase in the cardiac tissue. It does it specifically in the cardiac tissue. It blocks the sodium potassium ATPase. So because of that, what happens? The sodium availability on the inside increases. If the sodium is already available, then the functionality of this sodium calcium exchanger becomes down. So watch here carefully. What has happened? The sodium availability inside has been increased. The sodium calcium exchanger, what it was doing? It was throwing out the calcium and bringing in the sodium. But right now what has happened? This sodium is already available on the inside. So the functionality of this pump is going to come down, which in turn will make the lot of calcium available inside. So the digoxin is not directly affecting the sodium calcium exchanger. Instead, it is indirectly affecting it by blocking the sodium potassium ATPase flow. If the sodium is already available inside, the NCX stops means it reduces in a bit so that the calcium availability increases and it helps in the force of contraction. That is why digoxin is one of the drugs which is used for increasing the inotropic or the cardiac contractility. Then coming to the next type of action potential, that is a slow type action potential. Where do we see it? This we see it in the SA node. And there is a contrasting difference in the diagram itself. By this time you must have noticed it. The time is along the x-axis and voltage is along the y-axis. And here we have drawn minus 65. That is around the range of minus 50 to minus 65. That is where the RMP of the SA node happens. When you compare it with the fast type action potential on the right side, here you can note that there is phase 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4. But in this diagram, classically, some phases are missing. What are the phases that are missing? The phase 1 and phase 3. Sorry, phase 2. Phase 2 are not present. Whereas in case of this slow type action potential, the phase 1, that is the transient phase as well as the plateau phase, they are missing. We just have 3 other phases, that is the phase 0, phase 3 and phase 4. Phase 0, it is going an upstroke. As we all know, I need an entry of positive charges. There in the fast type action potential, it was affected by the sodium channels, but here who is going to enter? Here the calcium is going to enter. That is one major difference. And next thing is, for the repolarization, again the potassium is going to exit. This phase 4 not only has sodium potassium ATPase, but it has multiple other channels. That is why this phase 4 is called as pre-potential. This is very specific for a SA node, pre-potential. So let's understand what is this pre-potential also. So this phase 4 is nothing but a pre-potential. So as we saw in the essay note chapter itself, like the initial anatomy chapter or the conduction chapter itself, the essay note is a dominant pacemaker. And we have studied one property of it, that it is naturally leaky to many of the channels. So at the baseline itself, in the pre-potential state itself, it is leaky to multiple channels, that is the sodium, calcium and potassium. That is why this makes the pacemaker tissue to enhance and keep on producing an action potential. All of them are entering, and out of this the sodium channel is of more importance, and it is called as funny channel. Why it is called funny channel? What is so funny about it is, generally whenever there is a hyperpolarization or a repolarization happens, most of the channel get closed, but this sodium channel gets activated. The name of it is HCN channel, which is called as hyperpolarization activated cyclic nucleotide channel. So otherwise simply you can remember it as HCN channel, that is hyperpolarization activated cyclic nucleotide channel. It is called funny channel because it is activated by hyperpolarization. Whenever the potential is going down after the repolarization is happening, whenever it goes down below and gets an hyperpolarization, this channels get activated. That is very funny about it. Generally most of the channel gets closed during a hyperpolarization. Then the phase 0 is simple, that is our depolarization. And this depolarization is due to slow type calcium channel. There it was potassium, but here it is calcium. So there it was sodium, here it is due to calcium. And that is one big difference. That is why whenever there is a hypercalcemia or a hypocalcemia, the cardiac tissue is more susceptible because they are directly affecting the potentials of the cardiac tissue itself. Then phase 3 is repolarization. Repolarization is one place where you don't have to remember much. It is most of the times it is the potassium exit. So these are the various potentials of the action potentials of the slow type. Here you can compare it like a fast and slow type and study together. One major difference is it does not have two phases, and another major difference is the pre-potential is naturally leaky to many channels, and another difference is the depolarization. Here it is due to sodium, whereas in case of a slow type it is due to calcium. So these are the differences you should know. Then whenever there is a sympathetic stimulation, all of us know whenever you are having a high sympathetic activity, you are running, jogging or doing something which leads a lot of sympathetic activity, what is going to happen to your heart rate? The heart rate is going to increase. How this heart rate is increasing? So this adrenaline or non-adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine, everything is similar, and they are going to increase this HCN channel, that is the funny channel. So whenever they are increasing the activity of this funny channel, what is going to happen? The slope is going to increase, which in turn is going to increase the heart rate. So let's try with an example. Let's understand this. You consider this pink one as the normal action potential, and we are going to draw the one which is after the sympathetic stimulation. So I told you this pre-potential slope is going to increase. If the slope is increased, what will happen? If the slope is more steeper, let's say, instead of going like this, now it has become steeper like this. So what will happen? The action potential is going to start faster. The next time also it is more steeper. So what is going to happen? The action potential is going to kick in. Next time also it is steeper, it is going to kick in. So steeper, it is going to kick in. As you can understand that within a given span of time, previously there were only two action potential, two frequencies were happening. But right now, 1, 2, 3, almost 4 are happening in the same given span of time just by modulating this slope. If the slope is modulated, it is going to act faster. So that is the reaction that sympathetic system is happening, and it is just stimulating the HCN channels or the funny currents. Then coming to the parasympathetic, what it is going to happen? It is going to decrease the slope. It is going to slow down the slope, you can say. It is going to prolong it and then like that. So in the same given span of time, the number of cardiac potentials or the number of pacemaker potentials or the action potentials are going to count up. Instead of 4, the 3 is going to happen like that. So it is going to make it more wider and decrease the slope and decrease the heart rate if there is a parasympathetic stimulation. And now coming to the refractory period. I told you before itself, the refractory period in a cardiac tissue is for a very long duration. As you can see here, this is the action potential of a ventricular muscle, and here the absolute refractory period, that is till the half of third phase. As you can see here, there is a dashed line. Till the half of third phase, the cardiac tissue is completely in a absolute refractory period. So any stimulus which is given within this period is not going to do any of the change in the action potential. So that is the absolute refractory period. And remaining part, they are also in the relative refractory period. They are also in the relative refractory period. So the refractory period is very, very high, so that a second stimulus will not be able to do anything on this action potential, and that is why the cardiac muscle is not getting tetanized. Whereas in case of skeletal muscle, the action potential will happen first, then the muscle contraction goes in. Whereas in the cardiac muscle, we saw the contraction begins in the second phase itself. By the time the action potential ends, most of the contraction is complete. So let's try to understand. So the contraction begins here itself. By the time the action potential ends, the contraction phase also ends. If we give a stimulus here at the relative refractory period, a very strong stimulus, what it can do? Already the contraction is complete, so there will not be an increase or tetanizing ability in the further contractions. So that is the reason the high cardiac muscle cannot be tetanized at all. So let's try to understand why it cannot be tetanized. First one, it has gotten in a long refractory period. Long refractory period. So because of this long refractory periods, a second stimuli is not going to be of any help. Second stimuli is not going to generate any further enhancement. Next thing is, it has gotten a long action potential itself. By the time we are modulating the action potential, the contraction of the cardiac muscle itself is going to be complete. The cardiac contraction is going to be complete. Whereas in case of a skeletal muscle, this is the action potential and this is the contraction. Suppose if you give a stimulus here in the refractory period, what is going to produce? It is going to produce an increase in frequency so that the enhanced contraction can be gotten in, because the time duration of the action potential and the contraction, there is some time gap and it happens after the action potential. Suppose in the relative refractory period, a strong stimulus is given, the frequency of action potential can be increased, which in turn can increase the height of contraction in case of skeletal muscle, but which is not possible in case of a cardiac muscle. So this cardiac muscle, why it cannot be tetanized, we have already made a video of in the Explain Why series. You can go and watch that also. We'll try to put the link in the description. So that is one important give reason question which will definitely come in your MBBS exams, at least at some point of time, either in your university, pre-university, or anywhere else, like some of the exams, because this is one favorite questions of the examiner. So I hope it's clear. Thank you for watching the video. In the next video, we'll further move on to the further lectures. This electrical potentials of the heart is the same lecture of the properties of the heart. So properties of the heart is asked, you can just mention a few about the action potentials or the cardiac potential that is being generated. I hope it's clear. Thank you for watching the video. We'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much.